Showing pictures, and nevertheless, I am a writer. I've done about 14 books, and this is published by Knopf. It follows a previous book, an exhibition I did on the history of rock and roll photography, and it's not because I'm an expert either in rock and roll or sports. It's that I'm a photographic historian, and there are these hierarchies in my field. And certain subjects have been considered loftier than others, and consequently ignored in the larger histories of photography or even in the museums. And I like to say I'm old enough to remember when Richard Avedon and Irving Penn were not exhibited in museums because they were commercial photographers. There's a big Irving Penn show coming up at the Met next month because, basically curators decided, oh, well, let's look at the work and not worry so much about the reasons the work was, what it was done for. If it's brilliant no matter what the subject matter. With rock and roll, I recognized it was one of the world's greatest social revolutions of all time. And every revolution has to be documented to be believed, and these rock and roll photographers were on the front line, in areas that are now posh, like the Bowery, or this area was nothing. But they went out and documented these huge cultural changes. And then after rock and roll, it wasn't my idea. Somebody gave me the idea of doing sports, to which my kids said, "You're going to make a fool out of yourself, Mom. You know nothing about sports." But I do know about photography. And I do know that there hadn't been a museum show of the type that I thought should be done, which was, in a way, very different from this show. And I admire this show. But I wanted to recognize men and women who've devoted their lives to photographing sports, but also who, like Catherine Opie or Renata Dijkstra or even Annie Leibovitz, did serious bodies of work. We have a mutual friend in Hank Willis Thomas, and I was at an opening where his work was being exhibited. I passed him in the hall, and I said to him, "I just eliminated you from my show." He said, "What are you talking about?" He didn't even know he was under consideration for the Brooklyn Museum show. But had I included Hank, one of, I think, America's greatest artists, unbelievable respect for his work, it would have opened up the conceptual world. And that's not where I was going. I wanted to take a look at people who worked for Sports Illustrated, people who photographed the Olympics. My exhibition that was opened at the Brooklyn Museum is now at the Tampa Museum of Art, and then it opens in June 1st at the Olympic Museum in Lausanne, Switzerland. The Olympic Museum is one of Europe's big museums. I didn't realize that, but families love going. It's a great place, lots of bells and whistles and wonderful, high-tech installations. But I sent them an email this morning about all my contacts in the photographic world, saying, this is my exhibition and book is like the meeting place, because you're all sports and I'm all, photography, and this exhibition is meeting these two cultures. So what I'm going to do, because it's kind of fun for me to read from my book, which I kind of never do, is because this exhibition really pays tribute to women artists, and also a lot to do with women athletes. I'm going to focus it just on women who have been very, very poor relations. Oh, I'm sorry, I changed around. I just thought I better be closer to you. Women photographers, just like women athletes, have gotten a terrible, rough deal in sports. Title IX didn't come in until 1972. But when I was interviewing the the big sports photographers, the Walter Yoses and the ones who do the Super Bowl and, you know, Final Four things, they thought it was a joke to keep women away from the sidelines. You know, they saw a woman with a camera and they just thought it was funny to block her. Same thing with like the locker rooms, women journalists weren't allowed in. So there is an arc, but I have to tell you, it's a boys' club. Sports photography really is a boys' club. And to my delight, a lot of the best women sports photographers photograph extreme sports. They're fed up with the sidelines. They're not going to deal. They're going to jump out of helicopters and go the most dangerous, unbelievable, you know, power gliding with a cannon to get a shot that takes more courage than anything. But they're working for themselves on their own, and they're really making great breakthroughs. There are some women, you know, but it's growing. But the old saying that the editors used to go all the time about, that where women just weren't strong enough to carry the equipment. You know, we'd love to send you to the Olympics, we'd love to send you somewhere, but let's face it, you can't do it. And of course, there are plenty of women now who say, have you ever looked at a woman in the fields behind the oxen or carrying her loads on her back, you know, up mountains? You know, women can do it. So I'm going to read a little bit from my book, a little bit from the appendix, which is more about some things to do with how women were perceived, then a little from the introduction that gives a kind of overview, a philosophical premise to why and how I did this project, and then maybe some of the entries about people you will know or not know. So it's all women, including me, but not everybody in the audience, but it is a subject that, you know, sports photography, I felt, has not been seriously dealt with, and certainly women have not been given a fair shake, either as traditionally as athletes. They're not even paid the same, nor were they. I mean, one of the things about the exhibition and the book is, without even consciously thinking about, you know, the history of race and the history of women, it comes up all the time. I mean, the exhibition was in Brooklyn. You know, hello. It wasn't until 1947 that professional sports were integrated by Jackie Robinson. I mean, can you imagine professional sports today without African Americans? And anybody could play professional sports. You could be a murderer, a felon, an illegal immigrant. You could play professional sports, but you couldn't be an African American until after 1947. Probably because the whites were really scared that maybe they would become the minority in professional basketball. And the same thing with women. And here I'll start with this. Baron Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the Olympic movement, vowed that women would never participate in the Olympiad. His vision was maybe the women will serve the tea and hand the men the laurels, literally the laurels, but never ever compete. He had to rescind this promise. And and even, you know, for a long time, doctors advised girls and women not to exert themselves. A very famous doctor, you know, I'm sure he was a quack, but he was a famous quack, you know, wrote lots of books that people read. Maurice Bogie wrote in 1922, quote, "Girls are handicapped from the point of muscular development. They must not seek out exercise that requires a certain deployment of strength. Intense effort is not good for them. It tires them, damaging their health. The special functions that a woman must undergo and perform are incompatible with intensive muscular work. Here's the kicker. Women are not made to struggle, but to procreate. So a lot of schools really actually thought that it would be harmful to have women's sports teams. Wellesley, I think, was the first one in the teens to actually say, there should be women teams. And no wonder the women cricket players in this picture, which is in the book and exhibition, are so proud in this anonymous photograph taken in India about 1901. If they were able to get their bats near the famous Dr. Bogey's butt, they would probably have given him a good slap. There are late 19th century, early 20th century photographs of women with croquet sticks. Actually, croquet was allowed in the 1900 Olympics in Paris. Women could compete in croquet, archery, maybe golf, I think. Things that don't take a lot of running. With croquet sticks and archery bowls. There were pictures taken of women playing basketball in 1891, right after James Naismith invented the game of basketball. Actually, a group of women from a girls' school were looking at the boys playing basketball. It had just been devised by Naismith. He used peach baskets, at each end, and anyway, I curated a show on James Naismith, so I know a lot. But one of the women who was watching the boys play ended up his wife, and she was on one of the first basketball teams. This photograph I'll show you. Okay, first woman to swim the English Channel. She's wearing leggings, a unipiece. You remember what the early bathing suits looked like. They're heavy bloomer skirts. Well, they were really actually designed not for women to race or to swim the English Channel. I mean, you could sink in them. So here we have a photograph that I found at the Library of Congress. Women swimmers led the fight for recognition as serious athletes. They also wanted to get themselves out of the ridiculous costumes that weighed them down once they were wet. This photograph of Annette Kellerman in 1907, the year she was arrested in Massachusetts for indecency. Yes, she was wearing her one piece that she designed to allow her to swim properly. Yes, it showed off her curves and muscles, but her legs were completely covered, and it was very modest. And she was a world champion. She was already a world champion swimmer, and the first woman to publicly attempt and later to succeed swimming the English Channel. If the law was against her, the press photographers who flanked her loved her attire. She was arrested, so all the press photographers came to photograph how indecent she was, and then it was widely published. This photograph here is taken by the Byron Company. The Byrons were commercial photographers, and they were commissioned by Teachers College in Columbia to photograph all the facilities and what this was Dewey was up there, how education was being rethought, especially in terms of, this is 1907, huge waves of immigrants. They were teaching women to not only be teachers, but the importance of sports, physical activity, and fresh air. So the women had equal facilities at Teachers College at the beginning of the 20th century, which was very radical. They were encouraged to engage in sports. I mean, research is so wonderful. They even noted that they had hair dryers in the women's locker rooms. I mean, what push-a-walking hair dryers in 1907, but they recognized that women, it wasn't enough to just teach them how to teach kids in the classroom. They had to go out. I'm going to not read as much as I, thought I would, because, it's probably boring. But I want to tell you that in ancient Greece, the finest artists were commissioned to immortalize the finest athletes. And we can go to any of the great museums in the world and see depictions on the urns of athletic pursuits. We can see the great statuary. And they were immortalizing the individuals who maximize physically what the human body could do. And I think we all look at athletes and, even if we're not fans, we recognize greatness. We recognize the absolute achievement of the runners, the jumpers, the, competitive athletes. I've been doing some work with Kobe Bryant. I mean, to be the best is so unbelievably hard, and yet the achievement is gives so many people inspiration. So flash forward from ancient Greece, you have the invention of photography. The actual invention was not 1839. You have the announcement of photography. And in my book, I have what I think is probably the first sports photograph. It's 1843. It's a young tennis player, but tennis wasn't actually even invented until the 1870s. I screw up my face because when I found this picture, the collection in Scotland that has it told me he was a tennis player, so I kind of believed him. And my book was practically going off to press when I realized, it couldn't be a tennis player per se. Here he is. It's a paper negative. It's called the calotype process, invented by the inventor of paper negative photography, Fox Talbot. And just so you know, I've done everything from rock and roll and sports to the exhibition on William Henry Fox Talbot at the Morgan Library. I mean, so that's a big art, This is very popular. Fox Talbot is very erudite. The Morgan Library was the only place I really wanted to do the show because of the conservation issues. But, okay, he's standing holding a racket, which turns out to be court tennis. The Royal Tennis, Jeu de Paume, Hampton Court. It's a little like squash. It predates what we think of as lawn tennis. And he's holding still for maybe a minute or two. So we're not talking about action photography right now. But he has attitude. I looked at other pictures of the same young man, in a tie and a jacket, and he's like this, because he has to hold his head steady, and no energy, kind of pretty boring. But put this striped jersey on him, sexy white pants, and a racket in his hand. Even though he's not moving, he's conveying an attitude and an energy which we associate with sports. So really, there's such interesting literature. Who would have thought Roland Barthes wrote a book called What is Sport? There is enormous amount of literature every week, every day on sports, but nobody's paying attention particularly to the men and women, and I have to answer mostly men, but also women who've given sports its image. Because we don't fully understand it, but there's something about the still photograph that does lock in our consciousness. And when I was organizing the book and the exhibition, one of the themes, or one of the chapters I wanted to have was on iconic sports pictures. And I asked, friends who know a lot. There are a lot of people who know a lot about sports. Everywhere, probably in this audience, more about, what are the most iconic sports photographs? And everybody gave me their list, but what I realized is that sports is tribal. If I asked a German friend what their most iconic pictures were, they had no correlation to the ones my Brazilian friend said, or an American. Americans, more or less, it was all American baseball, basketball, and American football. And so they do intersperse some iconic pictures, which are kind of like totems that everybody remembers. But I tried to write about them either historically or to look at the picture, why it resonates in people's minds the way it does. I divided the exhibition in the book. I had a eureka moment, which was, how do photographers think? Because I didn't actually want to, do the book chronologically. People came up with some horrible ideas, I thought, mostly at the Brooklyn Museum, because they don't really care about sports. And most people in museums don't, except for the Olympic Museum, where my exhibition's going. But my eureka moment was, well, how do photographers think? And they think about vantage point, where they're actually going to be standing, where they're going to put their camera, what kind of angle they can get. They think about the decisive moment. And of course, the decisive moment in photography is not the same as the decisive moment in a sporting event. I wasn't looking for reproducing in the book, the winning touchdown, or, the great, dunk. As dramatic and fun as they are, I really understood that what lingers in our minds in photography has a complexity that extends far beyond just that winning shot, which may get published that day or the next day in the paper or in, Sports Illustrated that week, but it isn't the one that expresses the complexity, the nuanced, the aesthetic that I think really can manifest itself in great sports photography. I looked through thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and interviewed almost every living photographer, so that the stories were not about the athletes. It's the backstories to the photographs and who they are. So, let's see. I want to leave time for questions, but I thought it might be fun for me to read a little bit about what I wrote about some of the women, because there aren't many. But let me get the page numbers. Do any of you know who, maybe I'll read what I wrote first about Catherine Opie, because she's in this exhibition, and Reneke Dijkstra, and then, just a few others, right? Okay. So, because thank you for coming. It's always like this juggling act. I don't want you to have to feel like you have to stay too long, but I also want to make it feel like it was worthwhile for you to come out. Okay. 75. Okay. These books take a long time. It's such a big effort to write a book. Because it's all original research. Or just hard thinking on the subject. Catherine Opie has been photographing her LGBT community ever since art school. Her friends and life experience ground her work, As the mother of a boy, she's naturally inquisitive about, as Guggenheim curator Jennifer Blessing writes in her catalog, Catherine Opie, American photographer, quote, how masculinity is constructed for male subjects. Now, rather than traveling the country to document lesbian families of the American landscape, she travels to shoot high school football games. She has begun to look at a different community while continuing to explore her perennial interests in gender construction and notions of documentary reality. Catherine Opie has a huge heart. It's impossible to view her photographs without experiencing the tenderness and care she feels for each person before her camera. She understands that to ignore, to not see another human being is a terrible indignity. Growing up gay, she insisted on being seen, and she enables others to be seen as well. Opie photographed two sports, football, described by others not as a contact sport, but a collision sport, and surfing. Her surfers are embraced womb-like in large bodies of water. In one group, there are points on the horizon, and it's this gradation of color in the sky and water that is her subject. When the surfers emerge, however, holding their boards, we are back to her penetrating portraiture. She follows similar model with her football photographs taken 5 years later. She sees the team playing in a distant landscape, mountainous, suburban, or ill-defined. The action she captures is the anti-sports illustrated version. Nothing on the field is dramatic. What is dramatic are the portraits of the young, expectant, unsure faces of the teenage players, and there's one in this exhibition. One wants to thank Catherine Opie for introducing us to them. It's an honor and a privilege. This is a Native American. I had two photographs by her, but my exhibition and book is a historical overview, starting 1843 to the present. So this is just an introduction to many different photographers who have taken sports as a subject. Renike Distra, am I pronouncing it right? Okay, I always wonder, is also in this exhibition. I have different work by her in my show, but she's a major artist. But you may not know that she photographed, well, if you saw her show at the Guggenheim, you would know that she photographed bullfighters. But why and how she insists on those bullfighter photographs. Here's one. Actually, this one is by Ernst Haas, who was, I don't know if any of you know the name Ernst Haas. When Picasso saw this picture, he absolutely fell in love with it. He ran over to a friend who knew Ernst Haas, say, how can I get it? And this picture's now in Claude Picasso's home in Cafe, right over Cafe des Artistes he lives. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this one. Renike Distra, a contemporary Dutch portraitist, photographed matadors immediately coming out of the ring. She did her first body of work in 1994. The same year, she photographed women holding their infants just after giving birth. She wanted to photograph individuals physically exhausted. I mean, that's unsightly. Who's physically exhausted? And, without an ability to put on their guard. A woman who's just given birth, she's not posing, and matadors, men coming out of the ring. She thought in that state they would be unlikely to hold an artificial pose. She commented, "The matadors came out covered in blood and exhausted, very similar to the mothers. I did not intend to do the men like that, all macho and the women as mothers. It just evolved from the experience. Women make this extreme physical effort, while the men search for it. as a kind of adventure, but still both are exhausting and life-threatening. A woman after giving birth is transformed. She's unequivocally entered womanhood. Dijkstra understands that in many cultures, the Iberian included, men need to prove their manliness, generally through acts of bravery, which can also be foolhardy. The portrait of the bullfighter reproduced here is confusing, as the young man has engaged in a rite of passage, but still maintains his look of innocence and vulnerability. This is Dijkstra's brilliance. She knows that in his exhaustion, there can be no artifice. Dijkstra requests museum to hang her series of the new mothers, and they're still generally bloodied. They've just given birth. These photographs were taken within hours of giving birth, next to the bullfighters. What are we to make of the women who have brought life into the world and the men who destroy it? Okay, so I am going to give you a little background on women sports photographers by reading. Does anyone know Toni Frizzell? Oh, you do? From
like her Vogue work and everything.
Yeah, she. Well, I'll read about it. But yes, but you didn't know she photographed sports, or did you?
I mean, I did, but I know more about her fashion work.
Yeah. And Toni Frizzell also photographed the Kennedy wedding. That's probably her most famous work. Jacqueline Bouvier and John F. Kennedy Jr. But she has an interesting story in connection with sports photography. I did a book with Cecil Beaton called The Magic Image a long time ago. It was published. Do you know that book? Oh, you do? It was published in 1975. And it wasn't even my first book, but it became a classic. And Cecil and I came from very different worlds. I came from this world, Lower East Side. Grandfather, an immigrant, started a pickle business. Cecil Beaton had a different trajectory, but he was friends with Toni Frizzell, so she was put in the Magic Image, and he knew her from Vogue days. When Sports Illustrated started its trial dummy issue, I think, Sports Illustrated came out in it was, Luce had the idea after Life to do a sports magazine. And, they generally, actually, I've worked on magazines. It's always very interesting. You spend a year or two getting the first issue ready, and then you launch the first issue, and then you panic because the next issue comes out in 1 month, not in 2 years after planning for it. But Sports Illustrated was the great illustrated sports magazine in the United States from 1954, 1956, I can't remember, till fairly recently. And I don't know if any of you see it. Do any of you subscribe? Forget the illustrated part. They fired all their photographers. They pick up things off the wire. Some of it's commissioned, but, the greats who used to be given time and money and equipment to shoot Michael Jordan in the most incredible way, those days are gone. And that's another reason why I did the exhibition in the book. Just like when I did the rock and roll show, the days of, the album cover where you actually, I was interviewed by the New York Times today. Don Hunstein died on Saturday. None of you probably recognize him, right? The name. Don worked for Columbia Records. He shot over 200 album covers, including Miles Davis' Kind of Blue. My favorite was Freewheeling Bob Dylan. But, he shot everything from Sly Stone to Leonard Bernstein. I mean, it didn't matter. A great photographer who nobody knew his name until I exhibited him, kind of. But in those days, you had a communal image. You listened to the music, and you also held an LP. You had a picture. When my show traveled, it traveled to New Zealand, and I traveled around the country in small little areas, and people had seen me on TV, and the first thing they wanted to tell me is that in their small town in the middle of nowhere, they had the same album cover with the same picture that we had in New York or London. And it was you think it's all about the music, but it's also the image. And a lot of what we think about with sports heroes is about the image. And these men and women have given sports its image. Okay, so Toni Frizzell, it's a funny story, I think. Was the only woman in the initial group at Sports Illustrated, and she was assigned to photograph fox hunts, steeplechase races, and mule pack trips. The male photographers, many from working class immigrant families, a lot of them Jewish immigrants, because they had to find professions that they could kind of weasel into, because at every time in American history, somebody has it tough. One immigrant group or another, or one ethnic group or another. Frizzell was brought up with holidays in Newport and lunches and garden parties with the likes of Margot Asquith, Diana Duff Cooper, Lady Mandel, Katharine Hepburn, and Lillian Gish. She was experienced in the recreational activities, the sports, of the upper class in the United States and Europe. Her two most famous bodies of work are the Jacqueline Bouvier John F. Kennedy wedding and an extended essay on the huge and fabulously wealthy King Ranch in Texas. She wrote, "My years working for Sports Illustrated," she wrote in an essay for the catalog that accompanied the exhibition Man in Sport, organized by Robert Rieger for the Baltimore Museum of Art, on view from December 12, 1967 through February 11, 1968, were very happy ones. How great to get paid for going to all the places you want to be anyway. She loved to ski, sail, shoot pheasants and quail, mountain climb, and watch cricket, polo, and horse racing, and she persuaded the managing editor to let her photograph them all, except for Jerry Cook. And Jerry Cook, he changed his name when he came from the Ukraine. I can't even pronounce his former name. No other sports photographer would feel so at ease at Blenheim Palace, Foxcroft in Virginia, or the Vanderbilt's residence. She was to the manner born. Cook was not, but he had great style and he spoke English with an accent. As George Plimpton wrote in the introduction to Frizzell's book, quote, "Toni was not one to be found in the photographer's pens at the ballparks or crouched at court ends at basketball games." Man in Sport was the largest group of sports photographs ever assembled in a museum. It was actually, in my mind, I never read this, it's just how I perceive it, was to be the follow-up to The Family of Man, the most successful photographic exhibition ever at the Museum of Modern Art, including the book, The Family of Man, the most successful book MoMA ever did. There were something like, oh my God, nearly 700 photographs. It was huge. Out of the 68 photographers, only 2 were women. A photographer from Illa had 1 picture, and Toni Frizzell had 49, and the rest were all by men. To put in perspective how sports photography is viewed traditionally, and this is wonderful having this exhibition here. And this exhibition at the Baltimore Museum of Art in '67 was the largest exhibition of color photographs ever in the United States. and all the color photographs were printed by a man named Ken Lieberman, who had, I mean, he still prints for Cindy Sherman, master printer. Many of the greatest photographers, worked with Ken Lieberman, and many of the sports photographers he knew. And there was only one permanent color process in the late 60s. It was called dye transfer. Very beautiful, very permanent, very expensive. But all these 670 photographs, maybe 500 of them were color, were made by dye transfer. And I interviewed Ken, and he said he had given Robert Rieger, the curator, a great deal. And I thought, another eureka moment. I'm on the train to Baltimore to get these photographs to borrow for the Brooklyn Museum show, because it's very hard to find vintage color from this period. So they didn't say anything. They told me I could come down. I said, please bring out all the pictures, everything you have related to the exhibition, because I'm here to do my research. And they bring in a cart. And the cart had all the receipts, and it had carbon copies of all the correspondence. So all the thought, so I'm going through the prices and they ordered, paint to paint the wall. Everything was there. But I said, I really want to see the pictures. They destroyed them. All the dye transfers were destroyed because the director thought, well, we can't we can't put sports photographs in our collection. I mean, they're sports photographs, so then they put it in their gift store to sell them as posters, kind of, not as art, but just, these beautiful dye transfers. And then some of the photographers heard about it and said, you can't just sell my pictures. And then some of the staff took them, and the rest were just destroyed. So that was a big show, basically one woman out of, 68. Who else? Annie Leibovitz. Well, Annie Leibovitz loves photographing athletes. Figure that out. She loves people who know how to use their body, who can take instruction. I have a picture of Magic Johnson all bent over, palming the ball, bent down, because you normally see him reaching up. She doesn't like photographing in actual games. She photographed a lot before the Atlanta Olympics, all the athletes. She much prefers photographing them when in practice or when she can set up the shot. And she really does enjoy photographing athletes. Crystal Wright from Australia, one of these wonderful women who she tried to photograph on the sidelines, kind of hated it. Now she is an ambassador for Canon, and she's all over the world. She doesn't have an address. I've met with her a few times. She keeps all her belongings at her grandma's house, and she's off doing the most incredible adventure. Because my exhibition has a historical overview, really I had 19th century photographs of mountain climbing and extreme sports. 19th century was, you were also risking your life, but you were also carrying glass plates and chemicals and dark tents just to make one photo. Maybe I'll open it up for questions now. Would that be good? I mean, I can talk a lot. I am a New Yorker. Anybody see the show in Brooklyn? Oh, so what did you think of it?
It was great. Yeah.
What are you supposed to say?
There were like 12 or almost, 14 teams or a bunch?
The way I divided it was the decisive moment, the vantage point.
Olympics was one.
Olympics, portraits, behind the scenes. The one section that was kind of more specific to a particular sport was in the ring, and that was wrestling, boxing, and bullfighting, mainly because those three things attract just like the Reneke, art photographers, just like art photographers tended to photograph jazz, but not rock and roll, a lot of art photographers are fascinated by boxing. You know, they can really get up close and personal, get involved. Also, there's a long history and connection with painting, you know, with wrestling and what else? And fans. I had a section on fans because none of these things would really be what they are if it wasn't people going crazy over them. And crazy is the same wherever you are. You know, so fans in Africa are the same as fans in, you know, the Bronx. I had a number of digital presentations because sports photography is a form of photojournalism. And museums don't understand that, you know, I mean, I had Cartier-Bresson and Robert Capa in the show, and, you know, they made 8x10 black and white prints. That was photojournalism. Now nobody makes a print. It's all digital. And, you know, one of the curators said, well, why are there so many new prints in the exhibition? And what I said is, you know, you either recognize photojournalism as an important aspect of photography, and if you do, then you have to embrace the fact that photographers aren't making prints. They're shooting for the web, they're shooting for magazines, they're shooting for newspapers. But I did have digital presentations where I had extended stories. I had one on women basketball players in Mogadishu, who every day they go to practice and their lives are threatened. They are told they will have their arms chopped off if they play the demon sport of America, basketball, or they will be killed. And they go every day and they practice and they want to compete. And, you know, I wanted to have these extended photo essays. Believe it or not, I've been working with FC Barcelona. Are any of you soccer fans? They're a big team. But they were so excited that I was looking at sports photography in a different way. Because what they said to me is we think of sports as soccer and sports as part of culture. And photography has the ability to show how sports is integrated and part of culture. So just because I know this, because I was on a panel and I did some things with FC Barcelona, does anybody want to guess how many followers they have on social media?
Gajillions.
But?
Gajillions.
Yeah, that's about right. 300 million. To which I said, hi, why don't you put something on my book on your social media website? Because I can tell you, Knopf isn't paying for advertising. Well, thanks for going to see the show. I mean, I was very angry at the Brooklyn Museum for charging admission fee, because really the audience I wanted. Right now, it's packed with people going to see the Georgia O'Keeffe who are willing to pay $20. But a sports show, you know, you could bring in so many young people who don't normally go to museums. You could bring in, you know, a family, you know, because it's the perfect date night. The wife, I'm generalizing, but the wife likes museums, the husband likes watching sports. Hey, we could go together, you know. But anyway, any questions about the book or the exhibition? Or about, yeah?
I wondered if you could talk a little about the dye transfer process. And is that what Robert Rauschenberg used, I think? Or I may be confused.
Well, you know, it's before Cibachrome. Well, let's go back. Color photographs today can be very, very large. We see it all the time. I'm sure if we go over to the Whitney Biennale, we're going to see giant things. This is possible because of digital. But when you were shooting color film, you were very limited to what they would call like a C print. The paper just wasn't that large, and it wasn't that beautiful. And so it was very hard to think of color photography as an art form because the paper was a bit too shiny. It often faded. So dye transfer literally were the three dyes that were permanent, very difficult on much more beautiful paper. I'm not a technical person, so Google it. But it wasn't the size, although you could get nice size prints too. But the way photography is today, I mean, even something that's not huge, like these two, that's not considered that big. In the 60s, 70s, you weren't seeing color photographs like that. That would probably be about as large as a dye transfer. Any other questions about how I chose or why anything? You know about photography. Do you have anything you want to know?
Have you had any of your work produced in limited edition prints or giclées? Or?
I'm not a photographer.
You're not? Okay.
So the answer is absolutely not. I did a book with Harold Evans, I remember, called The American Century. That one took 12 years. And, people thought my contribution might have been that I took a lot of the photos. Mm-hmm. No, I spent 12 years finding the 900 photographs. I'm really good at finding the photographs, not making them up. But I'm also kind of good at, I think, giving exposure to people who haven't been exhibited, or to knock down hierarchies that I think are ridiculous. There are many photographs, and you can take a look through my book, and if anybody wants to buy it, there's some downstairs and I can sign copies. But they're beautiful pictures. They're absolutely pictures that help us understand why people love sports. Because that's a given. People do love sports. I mean, The New Yorker, the art critic for The New Yorker reviewed my show because he's a closet sports fanatic. And he was so happy to have the opportunity to let it all hang out. I know very intelligent people who sit in front of the TV a ridiculous amount of time watching sports. One of the, as I mentioned before, like Roland Barthes wrote very powerfully about sports and why we need them, what they do for culture. I mean, he identified 5 different sports and how each one reflects the nationality, the culture. Hockey for Canada, the Tour de France in France, bullfighting in Spain, and these were clues to cultural identity. And I think now we're in a wonderful place, in terms of having broken down these boundaries that were very real with women, with African Americans, with, gays and lesbians. I mean, they are contributing to the diversity and the richness of our culture. And, they're also heroes, sports figures. My book, when I write, is about everything other than sports. It's about sociology, history, photography, culture, aesthetics, but I don't write on sports. Well, thank you. Thank you.